You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Colorado. This is the Engage the Rockies podcast. I am your host, Jarvis Caldwell. So today is November 6th, the day after the 2024 general election. And so what we wanted to do for our listeners and audience here is just bring on someone who kind of is in this sphere and knows the politics around Colorado and kind of give us his assessment on that. And that guest today is Mr. Jonathan Feiner. Jonathan is the vice president for Ready Colorado. Ready Colorado is an organization made up of Colorado conservatives dedicated to ensuring that every kid in Colorado receives the education they deserve and ensuring parents have the ability to choose where they send their children. And I will also add to this, I didn't have this in my notes, that Jonathan is also the former chief of staff to the House Republicans, to the late, great minority leader Hugh McKean. And that's where I know Jonathan from. And he may have had a hand in helping me get hired during my tenure there. I don't know, but I can only assume so. So, Jonathan, thank you so much, sir.
Thanks for letting me join you today, Jarvis. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, man. Okay, so I kind of mentioned this at the beginning here, but just so our listeners know, so we're going to be releasing this episode on Monday, which would be November 11th. So keep that in mind. We're filming it the day after the election, so we still have results coming in. I think there's going to be a new ballot drop here just in maybe the last couple minutes, at least for El Paso County. So some of these numbers and percentages might change a little bit. So with that in mind, all right, Jonathan, we're going to go big picture. Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris versus President Trump. I think we all kind of assumed how this would go in Colorado. Obviously, as of right now, the day after, Trump is the projected winner, and Kamala just gave a concession speech about an hour ago. You know, there's still, you have to certify the election and everything, but kind of big picture for Colorado with the presidential race. Any surprises there? What's your kind of take on how that turned out?
I don't think there are many surprises on the presidential level. I think historically, or at least the last several elections, you've seen the gap between the main competing parties of Republican versus Democrat being anywhere from 9 to 13 points, somewhere maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And so I think Colorado has shifted pretty solidly blue at this point from the perspective of national politics and to an extent the statewide offices too that are competed for. And so I don't think it was a surprise to see what happened here. I do think contrasting Colorado with the rest of the country, though, is cause for, I think, some introspection on Republicans in the state and even some Democrats too of looking at what's working and what's not working. And so I think as a conservative, I think there's a lot of room for us to improve and to build out some infrastructure to regain competitiveness.
Right.
In both state legislative races as well as statewide and congressional seat races too.
Yeah. And just kind of add to what you had said there. I believe, and I need to go back and verify this, but I believe President Trump got around, I think in 2016, he had lost the state to Hillary Clinton by around 10 percentage points or something. And then he did even worse in 2020 against Joe Biden, President Biden. And then I think he's around 11% right now as it stands. So he's, he lost by a considerable amount in 2016, lost even worse in 2020, but they kind of made up that a little bit. But still, percentage wise is pretty down. I'll be interested to see our next statewide election. So Republicans didn't have any statewide elections except for, I think, maybe some like at-large school board seats or something like that. But for the most part, it'll be interesting to see 2 years from now. We've got a governor race. Governor Polis will be termed out. So we're not going to have an incumbent, and it'll be curious to see how Republicans improve overall just 2 years from now. They got 2 years to start working on it. So I think you're absolutely correct, though, on the introspection part. Okay, let's move over to congressional races. Most of these races kind of turned out the way you thought they were going to be, whether it was Jason Crow or DeGette, Congresswoman DeGette. I mean, nobody was surprised how those turned out. What was kind of your take on some of the congressional races? Because there's some pretty close ones right now still being counted.
Sure. And especially after 2022, I think the third congressional district out on the West Slope of Colorado was at front of mind for some people, with Adam Frisch, who lost by just over 500 votes 2 years ago. I think there were some concerns, curiosities that even with someone like Jeff Hurd, who maybe is a bit more of your traditional Republican candidate, might still have a hard time overcoming a lot of the fundraising that Frisch was able to do. I think at one point earlier this year, he was the third highest fundraiser, second or third only to Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader of the U.S. House of Representatives, and then Kevin McCarthy, then Speaker of the House. Right. And so when you have that amount of money, I think no matter how quality of a candidate or not, it's certainly cause for pause to wonder, hey, is this possible? And I think just a little bit ago, it looks like Jeff Hurd's now Congressman Hurd, and it looks like Adam Frisch conceded. So it looks like that race is finalized. In terms of other races, I think the 4th congressional district is solidly Republican. I think in 2022, Ken Buck won it by 24 points. This time around, I think Lauren Boebert won 10 or 11 points. We'll see what the final tally is. So safely Republican seat, certainly lost a little ground there. So that race could be interesting over the next few cycles. I think after the 2021 redistricting, after the census, just given that parts of Douglas County, a little bit more metro area was lumped into that district. So I'm curious if in 2, 3, 4 election cycles, if we'll see any more competitiveness there, or if this year was a bit of an anomaly in terms of the relative closeness of the race compared to historical trends.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on that, it was Lauren Boebert, Congresswoman Boebert, when she was still over in CD3, like there was some polling coming out there that showing that she very well may lose. And then obviously she moved and decided to run in Congressional District 4. And as you mentioned, Ken Buck won by, 24 points. And I think Boebert right now, she's sitting at 53%. Now that's the difference there is that there's a bunch of other people on the ticket. I think there's like a libertarian candidate and a bunch of others. So I think it would be very curious to see 2 years from now, assuming that the Congresswoman runs for re-election, if this is just a one-off for CD4, or if it's because of the redistricting, or does that number move back up? I'll be very curious to see that one and see if it starts trending the other way like CD3 did when she was running for it. Congressional District 8. I think this was maybe the most watched congressional race in the entire country. I mean, I remember seeing things on social media like you had Speaker Mike Johnson come out and campaign with the Republican candidate for this one. I mean, a lot of attention, a lot of money that went into it. Do you have any take on that? And just to update the audience, as we sit right now, again, this is 4:30 p.m. the day after the election. Congresswoman Caraveo is sitting at 49.5%, and Republican Gabe Evans is at 47.9%. And I believe, I don't have the numbers in front of me, I believe it's like a 3,000, maybe 4,000 vote difference. Do you have any special thoughts or takes on that one?
I think similar to 2022 when State Senator Barb Kirkmeyer ran against then State Rep Yadira Caraveo in this race, it was pretty similar numbers, maybe a little bit tighter, but you did also have a third party candidate kind of
Right.
come in there as the spoiler.
Yeah.
And it looks like there might be that same situation evolving right now.
Yeah.
From the initial numbers that came out on election night up until this point that we're speaking, State Rep Evans has been roughly 3,000 or so behind kind of consistently with every
Right.
ballot drop number that's come in. I know at least an hour or two ago, spoke with someone close to his campaign and understand that there are, or at the time, were roughly 100,000 ballots still outstanding. So it'll be interesting to see how those break down the stretch. But like you mentioned earlier, this was one of the most competitive and expensive congressional races in the country. I mean, looking at how U.S. House of Representatives, that at the moment is essentially a one-seat difference in who has power,
Right.
given retirements and other things. Seats like this become all the more pivotal in these tight races, and so I think it'll be interesting to see again how, like I said, how the ballots break towards the end. But a two-term incumbent may be a little bit harder to defeat. So Congressman, may be a bit more resilient after this, but maybe not.
Yeah.
I mean, this is kind of your classic swing seat that evolved after the census and developed as a result of the 2021 census. So the demographics are very tight, and it'll be interesting to see how we come out.
Yeah, Congress, it would be a pretty cool thing to do, is to represent for a congressional district. But the idea that every 2 years you're going to be in a race like this, I mean, that just seems like a nightmare. It's like there's no rest, right? You're not like a Nancy Pelosi where it's like, okay, you're pretty much guaranteed it from now on as an incumbent. But for like what brought that to mind is talking about if she's a 2-term incumbent, next time around, just part of the infrastructure stronger there, and the stuff that you built over those 2 other tight races starts to, I think the advantage goes way more to you going in future races, it barring something crazy, a scandal or another redistricting down the road or something like that. But yeah, that
right. No, it certainly is always a seat, I think, to watch. It'll always be competitive. I do think there were moments where she did break with her party in Congress and took what some would describe as a tough vote, siding with Republicans. And knowing that you're in a competitive race, you've got to do that when you're looking at margins of 3,000 or less votes to come down to the side. And I mean, for anyone who lives in and around the 8th Congressional District, I'm in the metro area. I mean, my college and NFL football Saturdays and Sundays have been inundated nonstop with Gabe Evans and Yadira Caraveo commercials. And so it was interesting to see the way that she was running, which was very Republican leaning, talking about working across the aisle, securing the border, things that a few years ago maybe weren't as leaned on from Democrats. And so it was interesting to see how tight of a race it was by admission of the issues that were being discussed in those commercials. So now that the race is over, though, congratulations to everyone for getting your football games back and no more, hopefully.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up about the messaging and stuff like that, because I noticed that too. I would see Congresswoman Caraveo's, some of the messages she put out and tweets and things like that, and it sounded very conservative. Some of them, like she's talking about being tough on immigration and things, and I'm like, okay, all right, I see some internal polling there is probably guiding that, because I don't know if she legislated that way when she was a state legislator. I don't know if she made those same talking points. So Yeah. Anytime
Yeah,
you
and
see that.
same with
Mm,
fentanyl. Talking about
right.
being tough on crime and drugs, and uh,
Yeah.
decriminalizing fentanyl to an extent when she was in the state legislature.
Yeah.
I think we could directly trace that back, and so it'll be a
Yeah.
close race. We'll see. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, yeah. And then whenever the next ballot dump comes in, we'll see how much that changes. But at this point, 3,000, 4,000 vote difference, that's pretty tough to it's gonna be tough. It's a long shot. Okay, let's get back into kind of more of our wheelhouse from just what we know from our time working around Colorado. So state Senate, uh, after the election is over and everything's certified, is the state Senate going to be much different as far as the makeup between the parties than it is right now? And right now being 12 Republican senators in the minority, not in the super minority. Anything with that changes?
I think right now it's looking like the numbers are going to remain the same. There will be a little bit of a swap. Outgoing term limited state senator Bob Gardner down in Colorado Springs, that race to replace him is being competed for by Rep. Mark Snyder, Democrat down there, and then Republican Stan Vanderwerf. And it looks like Snyder is going to eke out with a couple thousand vote margin, again, pending whatever final ballot drop may happen or reveal to us. But that said, if Republicans lose that seat, Scott Bright up in the 13th Senate district, close to the metro area, has won his seat. So that evens out. And then Cleve Simpson down in the Central Valley looks to be retaining his seat. And then over on the West Slope, you've got Mark Catlin, State Rep Mark Catlin, Republican, going up against Cole Berger, that looks to be really safely in Catlin's corner right now. Looks like he's up by a couple thousand there as well. So I think people expect those numbers to hold, and so therefore I think you'll see the Senate Republicans maintain their current number and not slip a seat into a super minority.
Interesting. And correct me if I'm wrong. So Senate District 13, the one that Republican Scott Bright is projected to win, I think he's sitting currently at like 56% of the vote. That was outgoing Senator Kevin Priola's seat. Is that right? So, and the interesting thing is Kevin Priola, for the listeners who don't know, he was a Republican for a certain number of years, and then I think 2 years ago flipped and joined the Democrat Party. So by a Republican picking up his old seat, that's in a way it's actually flipping a seat that was technically a Republican not that long ago.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that was, to my recollection, and this was slightly before my time in the state legislature, but I believe that was one of the most expensive state legislative seats when he ran in 2020, and then in 2022 when he switched parties. That relatively safe Republican seat, went to a Democrat. So you are correct that I think that is more of a Republican seat, and so it's gone back that way this time.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So that's the Senate. All right. State House. It's our favorite place. Okay. Kind of the same question to you that I had for the Senate. After today, after all the election results come in and whatever seats change, what's the makeup of the State House? How different is it? Is it different at all?
It at the moment looks to be probably the same. There are one or two seats where Republicans are either up by a very small margin or down by a very small margin. I know in House District 50, you have in Democrat incumbent Rep. Mary Young being challenged by Republican Ryan Gonzalez, and I believe Gonzalez is up by about 40 votes as of right now.
50. So it was 58 votes when I updated this about 2 hours ago. So there may be a new batch in, and it maybe it may have changed some, but yeah, it was about 58 votes as of 2 hours ago.
Okay, well, I know that race headed into the election. I think there were certainly some Democrats that I spoke to that were prepared for Rep. Young to lose. So I don't think it would be shocking for her to lose to Gonzalez. But again, like everything else, we'll see how things fall.
Yeah.
The other race that looks. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Jonathan. Just before you moved off of the Young race, I personally, I obviously I don't live in that area. I'm not very familiar with Representative Young. I know Ryan Gonzalez a little bit, but is there a reason why this race is so close compared to a lot of other races? Like, is Representative Young? Is it a very split district, and she's just maybe really far one way or the other? Like, do you have any opinions or takes on why her race in particular is so close?
I think she and her husband, Dave Young, who's the treasurer of the state of Colorado, I think are known quantities in there and have been around for a while. And so I think being a part of the communities up there for a while gives her certainly an advantage along with incumbency. But it's also a pretty heavily Hispanic district. And I think Ryan Gonzalez can quite literally speak to that. And in a year or two where we've seen at the national level, Hispanics and Latinos go pretty overwhelmingly shifting away from Democrats and towards Republicans. I think that there's certainly some momentum there that Gonzalez has tapped into. That I think in 2022, he only lost this seat by about 300 or so votes, if I'm not mistaken. And so we knew that this was going to be a close race, regardless of how the chips fell. And so it seems as though the winds shifted ever more, perhaps in Gonzalez's favor this time around.
Yeah, no, that's a good assessment. I wasn't even thinking about the identity of Ryan plus what the community is. So yeah, I think, and we're seeing it at the national level with President Trump. I mean, he had a very high percentage, I think 47% of the Hispanic vote, I believe, or maybe that was just Hispanic men. I'm not entirely sure, but they broke largely for President Trump. So maybe that's why we're seeing that there.
Yeah, I think that was Latino men, but yeah, a large
Latino men. Yep.
Yep.
Okay, and you were about to mention another race here, and I cut you off, so I'm sorry. It might have been, I'm guessing maybe HD 16. That looks really close.
Yeah, down closer to your neck of the woods. So we got Rebecca Kelty going up against State Rep Stephanie Vigil, which again, to your comment earlier about Kevin Priola's Senate seat in 2022, Republicans lost this seat. It had been held by a Republican previously. And so Stephanie Vigil won in 2022. And so this, I think, was at the top of the list for House Republicans to try to regain and chip away at that super minority number that they found themselves in. Again, as of right now, it's really close. I believe we're waiting on some election day ballots, though. It looks to be a few hundred votes.
Yeah, the number, I wrote down the number here. Again, this is just a couple hours old, so it's going to change, but 378 vote difference with Representative Vigil being in the lead. So it looks like Rep. Vigil is at 50.6% and Rebecca Kelty's at 49.3%. But it's 27,754 votes, and so 378 vote difference is just, I mean, pretty incredible how close that one is. So maybe by the time we release this, it'll be decided either way by the time people are listening to this on Monday. But that's where we stand. That's how close it is right now. So as you had mentioned, likely the same day voters, or that drop hasn't came yet, because that's usually your last drop of ballots. So traditionally Republicans do better on same day voting on election day. So maybe that's enough to make up that difference.
Which is an interesting point to make, because we've seen this election a lot more early voting from Republicans who have historically waited until election day to vote, and instead this time changed those trends, which gave Republicans nationwide a strong advantage, especially in the competitive swing states. And So you would think that waiting on election day ballots would favor the Republican, but in a year where there's been a lot of change and altering narratives, I think wouldn't be surprised if a little bit of the election day trends shifted. So we'll see.
Yeah, I know that's a very important point, and basically, the question boils down to is that person, that Republican in particular, who voted on day one of early voting, who had never voted early voting before, like how many of those people who did that early voting are normal election day voting, and how many are low propensity voters, right? Because if you always vote every election and you decide to vote, on in early voting instead of on election day, like you always do, then you're just cannibalizing. That's just, it doesn't count as two votes, right? It's just, you voted early. So I guess the percentage, or the question is what's the percentage of Republicans who normally vote on election day decided to early vote? Because you're really gonna see that shift, and it may be more even out between Democrats and Republicans on election day. Unless a lot of those votes, those early Republican votes, are low propensity voters that sometimes they vote, sometimes they don't. That's
Right.
There's going to be a lot of consultants and political scientists and stuff. I think studying that one for a while now, because it seems like at a national level, especially, the Republican strategy shifted a ton since 2020, right? It was very anti-ballot harvesting. It was very anti-early voting and all that. And I think the Republicans at a national level and at different state levels are getting smarter on that, because if you've ever been involved with a campaign before, there's very handy apps and things like that show you, they're updated daily, and they show you who's already voted. And so if you're a door knocker, or you're gonna put out literature, and it's 68 cents per piece of mail, well, that person who just has their ballot sitting on their table, you're knocking on their door, you're sending them mail, you're spending money and time, the text messages, and it's costly. It's costly. And so it's like, hey, if everybody would just vote on day one of early voting, the high propensity people, then you could really shift your focus on targeting those low propensity people. So
Yeah, and I think this election, with how successful from the Republican perspective it's turning out to be, I think you've probably seen a long-term shift in strategy. If Republicans are seeing, okay, we changed this, it worked out really well in our favor. So rather than bemoan ballot harvesting and early voting, let's take advantage of it. And then, to your point, when you do that, you vote on day 1 or 2 or 3 when you get your ballot in the mail. Campaigns no longer have to chase you down. If you're a high propensity guaranteed voter, they can spend those resources elsewhere, ultimately saving money and being able to go after those lower propensity voters, which is really important, especially when we're talking about these races that are coming down to 58 votes or 378 votes.
Right. I mean, if you have a race that's only 50 or 60 votes difference, and it's like, but you could kind of get a estimate of that, like how close that is. Like, I mean, that's a couple door knockers can do that in a few hours, and it's just, so I know that the Republicans, I after how well President Trump did, they would be crazy not to just say this is the new standard that we're doing. And I know a lot of Republicans who have issues with like things like ballot harvesting and whatnot. And I understand that, because it's like the idea that you could go to a nursing home and collect 10 ballots. And at Colorado, you can have up to 10 ballots, from people, I think, not in your immediate family or something. A lot of people have concerns with that. And I understand those concerns. I think what Republicans are starting to look at is, look, yes, we do have concerns about ballot harvesting and this and that. However, it is legal in our state. And so if we don't use this method, the Democrats or libertarians or whoever are using this method. So because we're taking the moral high ground because we disagree with it, we're automatically putting ourselves at a disadvantage, right?
As Mitch McConnell says, losers go home and winners make policy.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. All right, Jonathan, we're running a little long here. I apologize, and I appreciate you agreeing to do this the day after the election. Let's get to the last little point here. Statewide ballot initiatives. There was like 150 statewide ballot initiatives this year, which killed a lot of trees because it made our ballots really, really long. But let's just touch on the two of them here that I think were really closely watched, really focused on. There's a lot of money involved in it. And that first one is that we'll talk about is Amendment 80. And that is the right to school choice in the state constitution. Being a constitutional amendment, all of our listeners know because we had on Michael Fields for our first ever episode and he talked about it. But it's a constitutional amendment, therefore it needs 55% majority vote, not just a simple majority. And as it stands right now, I believe it's sitting at 48%. So you have thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so we were supportive of that and really pushed hard to get it into the state constitution. I think there was a lot of lies spread about it in regards to from the teachers union perspective, those who came from that perch of saying this is going to be a pathway to vouchers, to privatization. This is going to be taking money from public schools when in fact charter schools are public schools. A lot of people who maybe are not as informed don't realize that, but charter schools are free public schools that you can attend. And I'm not saying charter schools were the only benefactor within this right to school choice amendment, but it was very disingenuous and false to say that this was privatization. And so I think too, coming out of 2020, when you've seen so many students in a state like Colorado take advantage of open enrollment, where both in district and out of district, you can attend a school of your choice, assuming the school has capacity. A lot of families have taken advantage of that, and a lot of students are thriving as a result of it. And you wouldn't know that from the rhetoric by Randy Weingarten, the National Teachers Union leader, who honestly had a bad night. Colorado was an unfortunate bright spot for her, but across the country, school choice did really well. And so I think what we saw with Amendment 80 in its defeat was that you had a lot of special interest money coming in from out of state. And you had, I want to say, close to $6 million opposing the measure that came in, blasting text messages and ads to just basically fearmonger. And that's just really sad to see when you've got so many families and kids who, though a lot of whom that take advantage of charter schools and just school choice in general, both in Colorado and across the country. So many of them come from poor and disadvantaged backgrounds and end up getting to schools and thriving and being able to get on a better path for their future. And so it was just frustrating, I think, to see that go down. I do expect, as a result of the amendment's defeat, that we will see more audacious attempts to undermine charter schools and school choice at the state legislature. And we are prepared to fight back against those. I know you've spoken about this, I think, with Ross Iser about HB 1363 from last year that tried to do an end run around gutting of charter schools, which was redundant and unnecessary. And so we are prepared for probably a lot more of those types of attacks. And I will say, though, with that gloominess up front, given the results of the presidential and just the federal elections in general, I think you're going to see some strong efforts to push for stronger school choice in the nation, and set up ways where families have better options, quality options, and students have abilities to pursue quality education settings that fit their needs and that fit what they want to do. So I think even though Amendment 80 was lost, we still have some silver linings in the state. Earlier today, we found out that the State Board of Education candidate for the 8th Congressional District, whom we supported, defeated the incumbent. So Yasmin Navarro will be the new state board member for the 8th Congressional District. And she's just a mom who's worked in the school. She has a daughter who is in the education system. Her husband was a Marine, and so they worked overseas and know how the education system looks. And she comes from no political background, just a mom who cares about her child's future and the quality education of other students. And so I think this is a great backstop to have on the heels of losing Amendment 80, because we now have a state board of education that will remain charter school friendly, which was at risk if this race was lost. So it's very gratifying to have this victory in the state where some of the other races didn't fall the way that we might have hoped for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard President Trump just recently talking about even like homeschooling. I believe I can't remember the context. It was like tax incentives or tax credits or something for parents who want to homeschool. And so his administration, just from what I've seen during the campaign, seems like it's going to be a very pro school choice administration, which is a good thing
too. I just want to jump in on that really quickly.
Yeah, please.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, it's okay.
I mean, I think a lot of people hear the term school choice. You know, if you're Republican, I think you're generally more favorable towards it, but it's such a big bipartisan issue. I mean, so many of the coalition members that we work with are on the other side of the political spectrum that are center left, and it's like one of the few, if not only, areas where there's agreement that just parents can come to agreement on and say, look, it's common sense. We want our kids to be able to get a good education, and it shouldn't matter if you're red team, blue team, or something else. This is about the students. And so that's just to go back. What's frustrating when you get lies spread about something that ultimately would help kids and families. But we'll march forward and onwards we go.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was two ballot initiatives during this cycle that I just saw the most ads for. I mean, just you couldn't watch a YouTube video without seeing ads for it. So Amendment 80, the anti Amendment 80 ads are what I saw, and like you said, it was just very kind of vague statements like Amendment 80 will defund schools or something like that, is what it kept saying. And it's like, that's not actually what it does, but they're playing, they're walking that fine line, playing on technicalities. But so Amendment 80 was the issue that I saw probably the most for. And then our last thing we'll talk about, Proposition 127, the big cat hunting ban. Just for our listeners who are regular listeners, 2 weeks ago, we had on Mr. Dan Gates for Colorado Wildlife Deserve Better. They were the anti-Prop 127 group. So we've discussed that pretty in depth, but if you can just kind of give us your take on it. And I should add, needed a simple majority, and it failed with only 44% of the vote as of right now.
I think its rejection is at least partly due to the wolf reintroduction that we saw a couple of years ago, where predominantly you had front range metro area districts in Colorado tell the rest of the state, who have to deal with the issue more so around wolves and as it threatens their livestock and where they live, to say, well, that doesn't matter. This is what we want to do, and it's what we're going to implement. And I think there's a lot of frustration around how that happened. And so, fast forward to now, and you've got mountain lions, which are terrifying and have done some damage to people, but also hurt the. And I'm not. I know you spoke to an expert, but I mean, as somebody who has family that lives up in the mountains in areas where mountain lions are more prevalent, I have family members who live on a road with multiple homes with horses, and these horses have been taken out by mountain lions multiple times. Now, I get that nature happens, but to say that you just can't shoot them if they're threatening your livestock or your horses or your home just doesn't make sense to me. And so this seemed to me as another attempt by predominantly metro areas who don't always have to or rarely face this issue and put it onto the backs of those in areas where they face these mountain lions more so. And so I wasn't surprised to see it go down. I was glad to see it go down.
Yeah. So, like, as a political science kind of observation of this whole debate for Prop 127, I think the anti-Prop 127 guys like Dan Gates, who we had on, they did some really good marketing. First off, I don't know if you've ever followed Colorado Wildlife. Colorado Wildlife Deserve Better, I think is the group. Anyways, they're all over social media. They have a great video editor, and they make really good short videos that really grab your attention. And they bring on some pretty high profile people like Derek Wolfe, the former Denver Broncos player, and some kind of rather high profile Steven Ranella, who's very well known in the hunting world. He's good friends with Joe Rogan. He goes on Joe Rogan a couple times a year. They've had him come and do videos for it. But they also, there's this term that sticks out, ballot box biology. And this is a term that they just kept hammering, ballot box biology, right? A nice alliteration. And the explanation of it is like, we shouldn't be regulating things that, you know, an expert, an environmentalist or a wildlife management expert or something like that should be the person controlling. And I'd use the example, if, you know, if you wouldn't take a statewide vote on the proper slope for plumbing, right? Like, you wouldn't do a statewide measurement. You would ask an engineer and say, hey, what's the proper slope for drainage plumbing, right? You'd ask the expert on that. And in wildlife, I know people think it's different because they think of, you know, cute animals and things like that and their cats, but the actual professional wildlife people who work for Colorado Parks and Wildlife and others, a lot of their former members who are allowed to speak out, they were seriously concerned with this. They were like, look, you know, they call it the Western way of conservation or something is how they call it. And it's about the way we do wildlife management in general in the United States. And it's actually very scientific, right? They're measuring, you know, growth of populations of this species, the decline of this species. Okay, you know, this is a predator, this is prey, and they do a really good job at balancing it out. And they issue tags to help control the population when there's too many. They lessen the tags or ban it temporarily if the population's really low. And it's been seems very effective way of doing it for a very long time. And I think the anti-Prop 127 people were just like, look, don't go messing this up with doing a statewide vote. And like you said, front range people in Denver who don't have to deal with this issue, just like they didn't have to deal with the wolves. And they're saying basically, you know, don't do that. So, all right, sir. That's my little rant at the end there. I really appreciate you. I know being in this world here, usually it's like the day after the election, you just want to like disappear, go on vacation or something. And so I really appreciate you agreeing to do this and taking the time. And before we sign off here, I just want to make sure people know Ready Colorado. You can go to readycolo.org if you want to find out more about Ready Colorado. We'll also put a link down in the notes here. But Jonathan, I appreciate you a lot, sir. And thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Jarvis. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.